What if the man sworn to protect Meghan Markle was the very person who nearly destroyed her marriage? Imagine that. The cameras flash, the crowds cheer, and yet behind palace walls, there's a whisper, one Harry himself would later confess wasn't entirely false. A whisper that has now become a roar. A whisper that could dismantle everything they built. Meghan's most shocking marriage secret has finally broken into the light, and the words Harry spoke cut deeper than any headline. Meghan Markle destroyed my life. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You see, every royal scandal has its heartbeat. Diana had hers with James Hewitt, with whispers of bodyguards and unspoken confessions that chased her to her grave. Camilla had hers with Charles, rewritten into history as if it were inevitable. And now Meghan has hers. Yet this one is different. This time, the bodyguard rumor wasn't just a footnote in tabloid history. It's the very key to unlocking Harry's private torment. A torment so raw that reconciliation with his father came only after this truth surfaced. But how did we get here? Why did this rumor refuse to die? Despite Meghan's lawyers, despite Harry's defenses, despite the billion-dollar PR machinery. Think about it. In the polished fairy tale that Meghan and Harry sold to the world, modern royals breaking free from chains of duty, why did so many cracks appear so quickly? Why was Meghan accused of being distant, cold, too controlling, even cruel? Why did staff resign? Why did friends vanish? Why did every whisper point back to her? Could it be that, like all stories, there was one rotten seed planted early on, a seed that grew until even Harry couldn't ignore it? And could that seed have been her relationship with someone who wasn't her husband? I want you to picture the moment. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, glowing, smiling, hand in hand. But just behind them, in plain sight yet invisible to the frenzy, stands the man tasked with her protection. Tall, silent, disciplined, eyes scanning the crowd. The world saw a faceless guard. But insiders whispered he was more than that. They said Meghan leaned too close, that their conversations lasted too long, that his presence wasn't just security, it was comfort. Comfort in the kind of moments when Harry was elsewhere, distracted, overwhelmed, or simply too trusting. And isn't that where the real betrayal lives? Not in tabloids, not in rumors, but in the spaces between smiles. In the stolen seconds nobody notices. In the subtle shift of body language that only those paying attention could catch. It wasn't obvious to the world, but it was obvious to those inside. Staff noticed. Friends whispered. And Harry? Oh, Harry, he noticed too. Here's the thing. The British press thrives on scandal. They'll invent a rumor if they can't find one. But this rumor? This one stuck. Why? Because it carried the weight of truth. Not the kind of truth that can be proven with photographs or court testimony, but the kind that gnaws at the edges of trust. And Harry, for years, tried to deny it. He tried to laugh it off, to say the tabloids were recycling Diana's tragedy, to argue that Meghan was a victim of the same cruel cycle his mother endured. But here's the contradiction. He later admitted the whispers weren't entirely false. Imagine the pain of carrying that contradiction inside your marriage every single day. What's worse, Meghan knew the whispers too. She waged war on them, legally and publicly. Lawsuits, threats, statements, all claiming lies, all promising retribution. But the louder she shouted, the more people leaned in. Isn't that always the way? The louder you insist on silence, the more people want to hear what's being silenced. So why does this story matter now? Because Harry's admission, the one he made to his father Charles, the one he made after years of defending Meghan, changes the stakes entirely. This isn't just a rumor anymore. This is an open wound in the royal marriage. This is the very thing that pushed Harry to say the words no husband should ever say. She destroyed my life. Ask yourself, what could drive a man who walked away from a crown, a man who gave up a kingdom for love, to turn around and admit that love betrayed him? Is it possible that Harry, blinded by devotion, ignored signs that everyone else could see? Or is it possible that Meghan, skilled in performance, played her part so well even he couldn't separate fact from facade? Let's go deeper. Think of the timing. When Harry's memoir, Spare, exploded, we thought we had the full story, his grief, his rage, his truth. But even in those 400 pages, he never named this. He never exposed this. Why not? Was he protecting Meghan? Or was he protecting himself? unable to write what he couldn't yet admit? And now, barely a year later, whispers rise again that a second tell-all is brewing. A memoir not about royal duty, but about marriage betrayal. If the first book rattled the monarchy, imagine what this one could do. Do you see the pattern? Every generation of royals faces betrayal. Edward VIII abdicated for love, but was accused of treason. Charles risked the monarchy for Camilla. Diana shattered the illusion of royal perfection with her affairs. And now Harry stands at the same crossroads. The irony is almost cruel. He swore to protect Meghan from the same press that destroyed his mother, yet in the end, it was Meghan herself, and the man protecting her, who sparked his downfall. Let's bring it closer. The Duchess of Kent's funeral. A solemn day. The royals gathered in grief. And yet, amidst the mourning, Catherine, the future queen, leans in and warns Charles. Harry is working on a second memoir. Even more explosive than Spare. And what revelation lies at its core? The bodyguard rumor. That's why this timing matters. Because this is an ancient gossip. This is alive, pulsing, dangerous. The monarchy stands at the edge of another firestorm, and Harry is holding the match. Now think about this. If Catherine, the one woman who has mastered silence and discretion, chose to warn Charles, what does that tell you about the severity of Harry's plans? Why would she break protocol, risk Harry's fury, unless the content of this memoir threatened to devastate the monarchy itself? And Harry's fury, it wasn't subtle. Reports say he snapped, his face red, his voice sharp. Shut up, Catherine. Not a brother-in-law, not a future queen, but a threat to his carefully constructed narrative. Because when someone dares to speak the truth you're trying to hide, anger is the only weapon left. But the truth has a way of outliving anger. And here's the chilling part. Just days after that funeral, Harry and Charles met in private at Clarence's house. After years of estrangement, bitterness, lawsuits, and distance, they reconciled. Why? Because Harry confessed. He admitted that the whispers, the rumors, the bodyguard scandal were not entirely false. Can you feel the weight of that moment? The heir who betrayed his mother's memory, the son who abandoned the crown, now returning with the words no monarch wants to hear. So we stand here at the edge of revelation. Meghan's most shocking marriage secret isn't a headline. It's a confession. A confession that has cracked their marriage, strained their family, and placed the monarchy in yet another storm. But here's the question you must ask yourself. If this is what Harry has admitted now, what else is still hidden? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The introduction section is complete. Would you like me to begin expanding Chapter 1 next? What if I told you the most dangerous rumor in royal history didn't begin with Meghan Markle at all? What if it began with a whisper so faint, so unbelievable, that even the tabloids dismissed it as recycled gossip, until it grew into a wildfire Harry himself could no longer deny? That's where we pick up. From the cliffhanger of Harry's admission, we dive back to the very origins of the bodyguard story. Because every scandal has a seed, and this one was planted long before the world realized how deep it could grow. Think back. Early 2018. Meghan Markle had just stepped into the gilded cage of royal life. Newly married, newly pregnant, newly anointed as the fresh, glamorous face of the monarchy. Cameras followed her every step. Every gesture was analyzed. Every outfit decoded. And yet, almost immediately, whispers emerged. She's too close to her protection officer. Did you catch that? Too close. Not unprofessional. Not inappropriate. Just too close. Subtle enough to ignore. Sharp enough to sting. And here's where the contradiction lives. The very people assigned to shield her from danger were suddenly accused of being the danger themselves. Can you imagine how that must have felt for Harry? His worst nightmare echoing his mother's story. Because Diana, too, had been accused of finding solace with her bodyguard, Barry Manicky, the man she once described as her greatest love. A man removed from duty after the whispers grew too loud. A man who died in a mysterious crash not long after. History repeating itself, or at least threatening to. But let's not jump too fast. The Meghan rumor didn't explode overnight. It began in corridors. Staff members who noticed lingering glances. Footmen who watched Meghan and her protector walk too slowly when no one else was around. A driver who claimed he saw laughter turn into whispers and whispers into silence. And silence, as we know, speaks volumes. Here's the irony. The palace has survived mistresses, affairs, divorces, abdications. But nothing terrifies them like the bodyguard narrative. Why? Because it collapses the image of monarchy's fortress. A queen, a princess, or a duchess protected by her guard is untouchable. But if she crosses that line, it transforms the institution from powerful to pathetic, from divine to desperate. And Meghan, whether guilty or innocent, was now being measured against Diana's ghost. A ghost Harry never stopped chasing. Now ask yourself, do you believe in coincidence? Or do you believe in patterns? Because every time Meghan stepped out, that same bodyguard was there. Tall, imposing, eyes never leaving her. He opened her doors, adjusted her coat, shielded her from flashes. To the world, it was professionalism. To insiders, it was intimacy. A shoulder brush too deliberate. A smile too private. A gaze too long. The tabloids smelled blood. But here's where it gets interesting. They didn't pounce right away. For once, the British press hesitated. Maybe they feared a lawsuit. Maybe they didn't have the proof. Or maybe, just maybe, the story was being deliberately buried. Remember Meghan's reputation in those early years, combative with staff, quick to threaten legal action, fiercely protective of her image. And every time a journalist dared to push the bodyguard angle, a legal letter followed. Silence was bought, but silence never lasts. And this is where the whispers turn deadly. Because when silence is enforced, people start talking more privately. The very walls of Kensington Palace became microphones. Meghan's staff turnover was record-breaking. Dozens of aides left within months. They cited stress. They cited unrealistic demands. But those who whispered in the shadows had another explanation. They claimed it wasn't just Meghan's behavior that drove them out. It was what they saw, or what they thought they saw, and they didn't want to be complicit. Now imagine being Harry, the boy who lost his mother to a bodyguard scandal, standing by his wife as the same rumor sprouted again. Do you think he believed it? Or do you think he forced himself not to? That's the contradiction. Publicly, he dismissed it as recycled lies. Privately, he couldn't escape the echoes of Diana. And that torment, that gnawing doubt, became the soil where his fury would grow. But let's pause here, because I want you to feel the weight of this. The origin of the rumor wasn't in the press, wasn't in Hollywood gossip, wasn't even in Buckingham Palace leaks. It came from the people who saw Meghan every day. People who noticed things we never could. People who risked their jobs to whisper, something isn't right. And those whispers grew until they reached the ears of the one man who could never afford to believe them, Prince Harry. And here's the twist. Harry wasn't the only one warned. Charles heard it too. Quietly, privately, his advisors told him. The same story that destroyed Diana is circling Meghan. Can you imagine the chill that must have sent down his spine? The fear that history wasn't just repeating, it was mocking them. But Charles, ever the monarch, didn't act rashly. He watched. He waited. He hoped it would fade. Yet he couldn't ignore the timing. Meghan's rise in the family coincided with a collapse in public trust. Poll numbers plummeted. Staff resigned. Rumors grew. And in the middle of it all stood the figure of a bodyguard whose name was never revealed, whose face was rarely shown, but whose presence haunted every photo. Now let's add another layer. Diana once said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." History loves irony. And Meghan, the woman who once promised Harry she was nothing like his mother, suddenly found herself cast in the same tragic script. Only this time, it wasn't a prince she was accused of loving. It was the man paid to protect her. So ask yourself, do you think this was coincidence? Do you think Meghan was unfairly maligned by the press recycling Diana's ghost? Or do you think where there's smoke, there's fire? Because remember this, Harry himself would later admit, the rumors weren't entirely false. And that's the crack in the wall. The one admission that takes this from gossip to history. The bodyguard rumor wasn't just a tabloid stunt. It was a shadow that followed Meghan from her first day in the palace to her last. A shadow so heavy that even Harry, years later, could no longer pretend it didn't exist. But what makes this even more chilling is where the rumor traveled next. Because it didn't stop with staff. It didn't stop with Charles. It didn't even stop with the tabloids. It made its way into Harry's inner circle. His closest friends. His military brothers. The ones who dared to tell him to his face what he least wanted to hear. And that confrontation, that moment when the whispers became impossible to ignore, that was the turning point. Because once Harry heard it from them, He knew denial wouldn't save him. But what happened when Harry's own friends told him the unthinkable? What did he say? How did he react? That's where we go next. And trust me, what came out of that confrontation would ignite a firestorm no one saw coming. What happens when the whispers you've tried to ignore are suddenly spoken aloud by the very people you trust most? What happens when the voices echoing in the press become the voices at your dinner table, your private calls, your inner circle? That's where Harry found himself, staring down a truth he could no longer dismiss. His closest friends, the ones who had stood by him through war zones, wild nights, and royal chaos, were now telling him something he refused to believe. Meghan is too close to her bodyguard. Now pause and think about that. Imagine your best friends. The ones who carried you after loss, who drank with you when you needed escape, who defended you when the world mocked you, looking you in the eye and questioning the very woman you sacrificed everything for. How would you react? Would you listen? Or would you lash out? Harry did both. It began subtly. Friends teasing him, half joking, half serious. Mate, does it ever bother you how much time she spends with him? A comment dropped casually over whiskey, maybe meant as a warning, maybe as a test. At first, Harry laughed it off. He said the press was desperate, recycling Diana's tragedy for headlines. He said Meghan was strong, independent, and of course she bonded with her team. She had to, given the scrutiny. But behind the laughter, something shifted in his eyes. Doubt. And doubt is poison. Once it enters, it spreads. Let's be clear. Harry's friends weren't palace courtiers or gossipy aides. These were his army mates. Brothers forged in Afghanistan. Men who knew loyalty, who valued honor, who hated deceit. They weren't interested in tabloids. They weren't impressed by Meghan's Hollywood sparkle. They were soldiers, trained to spot danger, to notice patterns others miss. And what they noticed disturbed them. They said Meghan's guard wasn't just protective. He was attentive. Too attentive. His hand hovered too long when he guided her through a crowd. His eyes locked too often when she spoke. His voice softened in private moments when no cameras were near. The soldiers saw it, and once they mentioned, "Do you know what's worse than suspicion? Recognition." Harry began replaying moments in his head. The way Meghan laughed at a joke the guard told, a laugh Harry hadn't heard from her in weeks. The way she touched his arm casually, almost instinctively, when thanking him for something small. The way she defended him once, sharply, when a staff member complained about his methods. Little things. Invisible things. Things that, once noticed, can never be forgotten. But Harry's reaction wasn't to admit concern. No, he exploded. He told his friends they were buying into lies, that they were betraying him, that they were jealous of Meghan's power. His fury was legendary. Yet the louder he shouted, the clearer it became. Their words had landed. Because anger, as we all know, often masks fear. And here's the contradiction. While Harry defended Meghan publicly, his behavior shifted privately. Insiders say he grew more watchful, more paranoid. He started testing Meghan with questions, casual at first, then sharper. He asked where she'd been, who she'd spoken to, why she smiled more with her guard than with him. Meghan noticed. And Meghan, never one to tolerate suspicion, snapped back. This is where their marriage began to fracture in ways the world never saw. Behind the California smiles, behind the carefully staged photos, arguments raged. Meghan accused Harry of mistrust, of weakness, of letting his mother's ghosts haunt their marriage. Harry accused Meghan of secrecy, of manipulation, of hiding behind her role as victim. And at the center of every fight was the bodyguard. Now let's add the emotional spike. Imagine Harry calling one of his closest confidants, his voice raw, his words trembling. "I can't tell what's real anymore." This was the man who once strutted in uniform, fearless in combat, now reduced to confusion by the woman he gave up his kingdom for. Do you see the tragedy? The prince who fought wars abroad could not win the war in his own home. But here's the twist. The more Harry doubted, the more Meghan doubled down. She paraded her loyalty in public, kissing him harder for the cameras, smiling brighter at his side, speaking louder about their unbreakable love. And the world, blinded by the performance, believed it. But insiders knew better. Because behind those smiles, Harry's closest friends were drifting. They were cut off, silenced, removed. Meghan didn't want them near, and Harry, though he knew why, let them go. And yet, the whispers never left. Because whispers, once born, live forever. Even when silenced, they echo. Even when denied, they grow. And Harry, for all his defenses, carried those whispers like chains. But then came the moment no one expected. The moment when those whispers reached King Charles himself. Imagine the weight of that conversation. A father, haunted by his own past with Diana, being told that his son's wife was walking the same dangerous path. A monarch, sworn to protect the crown, realizing his own bloodline might be tainted by betrayal. Can you imagine the irony? The son who abandoned the family for love, now accused of being abandoned by that very love. And Charles's reaction? It stunned Harry. Because Charles, who had endured his own scandals, didn't explode. He didn't deny. He didn't comfort. He simply stared, silent, cold, carrying the weight of a man who had seen this all before. That silence spoke louder than any words. But what did Charles say next? What warning did he give his son? And how did Harry respond when he realized even his father believed the whispers? That's the part that changes everything. Because once Charles entered the story, the palace itself began to stir. And when the palace stirs, the storm is never far behind. What if history wasn't just repeating itself, but mocking the monarchy, playing the same cruel game twice with different characters? That's what Chapter 3 forces us to face. The palace had seen this movie before. Diana, the whispers of Barry Manicky, her bodyguard, the late-night phone calls, the rumors that shook the monarchy, the silence that followed his sudden death. And now, decades later, the palace corridors were alive with a sickening déjà vu. This time it wasn't Diana. It was Meghan. And the comparison was unavoidable. Let's go back. Picture the 1980s. Diana, young, vulnerable, suffocated by a loveless marriage. Who offered her the comfort she craved? Not Charles. Not her in-laws. It was a bodyguard. Barry Manicky. A man whose loyalty transformed into something deeper. Something dangerous. And when whispers reached the palace, what happened? He was removed. Then dead. Diana, years later, said openly that losing him was the greatest devastation of her life. That he had been her true love. Can you imagine how those words scarred Charles? And now, decades later, to hear his son entangled in the same shadows. It was almost poetic in the most tragic way. Now let's fast forward to Meghan. The palace saw her glow, her charisma, her ability to control Harry with ease. But they also saw something else. Too many lingering glances at her guard. Too many excuses. Too much noise. And the parallels with Diana weren't just haunting, they were terrifying. The monarchy could not afford a second Diana. They could not afford another bodyguard scandal. So what did they do? Exactly what they always do. Damage control. Advisors called meetings. Statements were drafted. Lawyers prepared. Everything was designed to smother the story before it caught fire. But here's the problem. Fire spreads fastest when you try to suffocate it. And here's the contradiction. Publicly, Meghan was untouchable. She was the Duchess of Sussex, the royal bride, the woman who supposedly modernized the monarchy. But behind the gilded walls, aides were whispering about her late-night calls, her whispered conversations, her closeness with someone who should never have been more than an employee. Do you see the irony? The very system that was supposed to protect her reputation was the same system keeping the whispers alive. Ask yourself, did the palace cover this up to protect Meghan, or to protect itself? Because think about it. If the world saw a repeat of Diana's tragedy, what would that say about the monarchy? That nothing had changed. That history was doomed to loop endlessly, with new victims each time. Harry, of course, didn't see it that way. To him, every whisper was another attack on his wife. Another attempt to destroy her the way they destroyed his mother. He raged at the palace, accusing them of betrayal, of feeding lies, of failing to protect Meghan. But what Harry couldn't see, or refused to see, was that some of those whispers didn't come from outside. They came from within his own home. Staff members who saw too much. Friends who warned him. Even his own father, Charles, who sat silently when the rumor was brought up. That silence cut Harry deeper than any headline. But here's where the emotional spike hits. Harry had always sworn he'd never let what happened to his mother happen to his wife. But what if, without realizing it, he had stepped straight into the same script? Diana's bodyguard. Meghan's bodyguard. Diana's marriage broken by affairs. Harry's marriage cracking under suspicion. Diana dead before her time. And Harry, watching the echoes grow louder with every passing day. Do you see the contradiction? The man who walked away from the monarchy to escape his mother's fate had carried her ghost right into his marriage. And Meghan, whether guilty or not, became the stage where that ghost performed. Let's zoom in on one night in particular. A private dinner. Meghan, radiant in designer black. Harry, brooding. The guard, stationed just a little too close. A photographer caught the moment. Not scandalous, not damning, but subtle. Meghan's eyes glanced back at him, just for a second, with a softness rarely seen in her photos with Harry. The picture never made headlines, but those who saw it inside the palace never forgot it. One aide allegedly said, "That was the moment we knew the rumors were true." Of course, Meghan denied everything. She unleashed her lawyers. She dismissed staff as liars, jealous, racist, bitter, and maybe some were. But here's the irony. The harder she fought, the more the whispers grew. Because when someone sues too quickly, too loudly, people start asking, what are they afraid we'll find? And then came the cruelest twist of all. Meghan herself reportedly mocked Diana's story in private, saying she would never lower herself the way Diana did. That she was smarter, savvier, untouchable. But Harry? Hearing those words from the woman he adored, the woman he sacrificed everything for, it cut him in two. Because to him, Diana was a saint. To Meghan, she was a cautionary tale. So where does this leave us? The palace was on red alert. Harry was in denial. Meghan was on the offensive. And the bodyguard? Silent. Always silent. His silence was the loudest sound of all. But the palace couldn't hold the line forever. The longer they buried the story, the more it grew. And eventually, it burst into the open in a way no one expected, because the one person who was never supposed to see it finally did. Harry himself. And when Harry finally saw the proof, when the whispers transformed into undeniable reality, his world cracked. But what proof did Harry see? What was the moment that took this from rumor to reality? That's where we go next. And what he found would ignite a storm no one could control. What if the greatest defense Meghan Markle ever built was also her greatest weapon? Chapter 4 takes us straight into Meghan's counteroffensive. The denials, the legal threats, the carefully staged PR performances that tried to bury the whispers of a scandal. Because if the palace feared history repeating itself, Meghan feared something else entirely. The collapse of the image she had spent her entire life crafting. From the beginning, Meghan understood the power of narrative. She wasn't just marrying a prince, she was marrying a platform. Every outfit, every smile, every carefully chosen phrase was part of a script. The world was supposed to see her as a victim turned victor, a Hollywood outsider who stormed the gates of the world's most rigid monarchy. But when the bodyguard whispers began to spread, that script cracked. So Meghan did what Meghan always does. She doubled down. Her first move was silence. Deny nothing, admit nothing, address nothing. Just smile brighter, laugh louder, hold Harry's hand a little tighter for the cameras. Isn't it ironic how silence sometimes screams louder than words? The tabloids grew hungry. The whispers spread. And when silence wasn't enough, Meghan escalated. Lawyers were summoned. Threats of lawsuits flew. Statements were drafted. The narrative was reset. Baseless lies. Racist attacks. Hateful gossip designed to destroy a strong woman. But let's pause for a second. Isn't there something almost theatrical in how Meghan fought this? She didn't just deny, she performed the denial. Think about it. Oprah interview. Magazine covers. Emotional anecdotes about bullying and survival. She painted herself as Diana 2.0, only stronger, smarter, and more prepared. And here's the contradiction. In trying to avoid Diana's fate, Meghan walked straight into her shadow. Because just as Diana once used her charm to shield herself from criticism, Meghan used her media savvy to shift blame. But here's the problem with PR. It only works if people believe the performance. And not everyone did. In fact, many of Meghan's own staff saw her efforts as proof she was hiding something. Why? Because her reaction was too sharp, too defensive. One aide allegedly said, "If it wasn't true, why fight so hard? Why not just ignore it?" That's the contradiction. Denial is supposed to end rumors, but Meghan's denials only made them grow. And Harry? He stood by her, at least in public. He lashed out at the press, accusing them of racism, of misogyny, of targeting Meghan unfairly. He told the world the story was a recycled attack, designed to destroy the woman he loved. But behind closed doors, things weren't so simple. Friends say Harry was torn. Half of him believed Meghan. The other half heard the echo of his mother's story. He defended her, yes, but his defenses grew weaker each time the whispers returned. Now let's inject a little humor. Imagine Meghan rehearsing her smiles in the mirror before stepping into a public event. Too much teeth? Too little? Hold Harry's hand tighter, tilt the chin just right, squeeze out one perfectly timed laugh. Everything was calibrated. Everything was staged. And yet, no matter how hard she tried, people still looked past the performance. They didn't see love. They saw tension. They didn't see loyalty. They saw suspicion. The irony here is almost cruel. Meghan built her brand on being relatable, real, raw. But when the scandal came, she was anything but. Instead, she became untouchable, unreachable, almost robotic in her responses. And the world noticed. Her Hollywood charm began to look more like Hollywood acting. But here's the emotional spike. Behind the PR, Meghan reportedly confronted Harry with fury. She accused him of weakness for even entertaining the whispers. She accused him of betrayal for doubting her. She accused him of letting his mother's ghost poison their marriage. Do you see the twist? Meghan turned the suspicion back onto Harry, forcing him to choose her or the whispers. And Harry, desperate not to lose another woman to the press, chose her. At least for now. But something shifted that couldn't be undone. Because no matter how loudly Meghan denied, no matter how tightly Harry held her hand, one moment cracked the illusion. A charity event. Cameras flashing. Meghan radiant in designer clothes. And the bodyguard, always there, always near. She leaned in, whispered something only he could hear. A smile flashed across his face. A smile the world wasn't meant to see. Photographers caught it. Not scandalous. Not damning. But intimate enough that insiders whispered, "This is the proof." Meghan's lawyers scrambled. They tried to buy the photos. They tried to kill the story. But by then, the damage was done. The image of Meghan, whispering to her protector while Harry stood inches away, haunted the palace. Harry saw it too, and no amount of PR could erase it from his mind. So here's the contradiction that tore at Harry's soul. Publicly, he defended Meghan with every ounce of rage he had. Privately, he couldn't ignore what he'd seen. And Meghan? She played her role flawlessly, even as the whispers refused to die. But remember, PR can only shield you for so long. Because eventually, the stage lights dim, the cameras go dark, and reality walks in. And that reality came crashing down one night, when Meghan and the bodyguard crossed a line even Harry couldn't ignore. But what exactly happened that night? What did Harry see with his own eyes that made him realize denial could no longer save them? That's where we go next. And it's the night that changed everything. What if the moment that shattered Harry's world didn't come from a headline or a whispered rumor, but from something he saw with his own eyes? Chapter 5 takes us to the night that changed everything. The night Harry could no longer deny what so many others had tried to warn him about. It wasn't a grand occasion. Not a red carpet gala. Not a televised ceremony. Not one of those moments where the entire world stares at the royals like hawks. No, this was private. Intimate. An event meant to be hidden in plain sight. A fundraiser, low profile, attended by a few insiders, celebrities, and friends of the Sussex circle. No press allowed, no cameras rolling, just polished secrecy. And yet it was here, on this night, that Harry's illusion cracked. Imagine the room. Dimmed lights. Soft music. Meghan dazzling in a sleek gown, the kind designed to draw every eye but still whisper sophistication. Harry by her side, though distracted, perhaps a little weary. He'd been fighting battles on too many fronts. Family, press, friends. And always, there was the bodyguard. Positioned close, closer than usual, hovering with an attentiveness that seemed almost personal. At first, nothing unusual. He guided her through the crowd, adjusted her glass when she reached too far, smiled when she whispered something brief. But then came the moment. A moment so subtle that, had Harry not been watching, it would have slipped past unnoticed. Meghan leaned in, not the casual lean of a duchess acknowledging her staff, but the familiar lean of a woman speaking to someone who knew her well. Their faces close, too close. Her laugh, soft, private, echoed with a warmth Harry hadn't felt from her in weeks. And then, the touch. A hand on his arm. Light, fleeting, but unmistakably intimate. Harry froze. His eyes locked. And in that instant, the whispers became screams. Because he had seen it. The closeness. The familiarity. The spark. It wasn't tabloid fiction anymore. It wasn't staff gossip. It wasn't his friends' warnings. It was real. But what did Harry do? Nothing. At least, not then. He stood there, silent, his blood boiling, his mind spinning. Do you know why? Because when betrayal stares you in the face, the first instinct isn't confrontation. It's denial. A desperate need to believe you misread it, that your eyes deceived you, that the woman you sacrificed everything for couldn't possibly betray you in such a way. But Harry's heart knew, and Meghan knew he saw, because when her eyes met his across the room, her smile faltered for just a second, just long enough to confirm what words never could. Now let's break this down. This wasn't a kiss. This wasn't an embrace. This wasn't a scandal splashed on front pages. It was something far more dangerous. It was subtle, and subtle is lethal, because subtlety leaves room for doubt, and doubt is poison. The palace could deny an affair. Meghan could sue for defamation. Harry could rage against the press. But none of that mattered anymore, because in Harry's mind, the truth had already taken root. Think about the emotional weight of that. The man who gave up his country, his family, his inheritance, and his role in history for love, now forced to wonder if that love was a lie. Can you imagine the fury, the despair, the helplessness? Would you confront your partner in that moment? Or would you wait, terrified of what their answer might confirm? Harry chose silence that night. But silence doesn't erase. It festers. And when they returned home, the dam finally broke. Witnesses claimed voices were raised. Accusations flew. Meghan, cornered, snapped back with venom. She mocked Harry for being paranoid, for living in his mother's shadow, for allowing ghosts of Diana to poison their marriage. She told him he was weak. And Harry, shaking with rage, threw back the words he never thought he'd say. I saw it. Don't lie to me. I saw it. Do you feel the power of that? The silence of years, the denial, the defenses, all collapsing in one explosion. And Meghan's response? Not tears. Not confession. Fury. She turned it back on him, as always. She claimed he was imagining things, twisting moments, projecting his mother's tragedy onto her life. She accused him of betrayal for not defending her more fiercely, for not silencing his friends, for doubting her loyalty. It was a performance, sharp, brilliant, terrifying. And Harry, already broken, couldn't tell if it was genuine or not. Here's the contradiction. The more Meghan denied, the more Harry doubted. Because in his heart, he couldn't unsee what he saw. That touch, that laugh, that closeness. It wasn't fiction. It was fact. And yet, here's the cruel irony. Harry still loved her. Desperately. Pathetically. Completely. Even as rage consumed him, he wanted to believe her. Even as whispers tore him apart, he clung to the image of the woman he thought he knew. Isn't that the tragedy of betrayal? That sometimes the victim is the one who fights hardest to preserve the lie? But the lie couldn't hold. Because the night Harry saw too much was only the beginning. There were other nights, other whispers, other cracks that would widen until the entire marriage trembled. And Harry's quiet shock would soon turn into something more dangerous, obsession. He needed proof. He needed answers. He needed to know if the woman he loved was his wife or his destroyer. But where do you turn when the truth you're seeking may be the truth that ruins you? That's where we go next. And the proof Harry found, once hidden, now undeniable, would shatter everything. What do you do when the love of your life becomes the source of your deepest suspicion? When every smile feels like a mask, every word like a performance, every touch like a test? That's where Harry found himself after that night. Chapter 6 takes us into the unraveling of his marriage. Not in headlines, not in staged photos, but in the silence of their private home, where whispers turned into arguments, and arguments turned into wounds that never healed. Harry had always thought betrayal would be obvious. A text message left open. A late-night call caught red-handed. A kiss in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this wasn't obvious. This was worse. It was subtle, invisible, poison in the water he drank every day. And that subtlety drove him mad. Because how do you prove the unprovable? How do you confront a ghost that lives between glances and whispers? He started noticing everything. The way Meghan's phone never left her side. The way her tone softened when she spoke to staff, especially him. The way she smiled at the bodyguard, not the way she smiled at Harry, but differently. Sharper, warmer, more alive. And once Harry noticed, he couldn't unsee. Every detail became a weapon. It consumed him. Insiders say Harry began keeping track of Meghan's schedule, her movements, her words. Not in the way of a paranoid husband, but in the way of a man desperately searching for proof he didn't want to find. He was haunted by Diana's past, haunted by the whispers of staff, haunted by the look in Meghan's eyes that night at the fundraiser. And Meghan? She felt it. She saw his eyes watching her, measuring her, doubting her. And instead of soothing him, instead of reassuring him, she turned the blade. She accused him of being paranoid. She mocked him for his weakness. She weaponized his mother's ghost against him. "You're just like them," she reportedly spat one night. "Always looking for an excuse to blame me. Do you feel the irony?" Harry, the man who once vowed to protect Meghan from the press, now being accused of becoming just like the press himself. The protector turned interrogator. The husband turned doubter. And this is where the tragedy deepens. Because Harry wasn't wrong. He had seen too much. He wasn't imagining things. But at the same time, he was lost. Because proof, real proof, was slippery. He couldn't hold it in his hands. He couldn't show it to the world. And Meghan used that against him. Every time he accused, she demanded evidence. Every time he doubted, she twisted it back on him. "Show me proof," she'd say, daring him to find what he couldn't. And so the marriage spiraled. Arguments became routine. Shouts replaced conversations. Doors slammed. Harry, exhausted, tried to write. He poured his rage into drafts of what could have been his second memoir. Drafts that insiders claim were filled not with palace gossip, but with marital betrayal. Pages where he raged, where he confessed, where he admitted the words that would later haunt him. "Meghan Markle destroyed my life." But he couldn't publish them. Not yet. Because even in his fury, even in his doubt, he still loved her. He still needed her. That's the cruelest part of betrayal. You can hate someone with every fiber of your being and still crave their love. Let's pause for a question. If you were Harry, what would you do? Would you stay, hoping it was all in your head? Or would you walk, risking the collapse of everything you'd built together? Harry stayed. For the children. For the image. For the hope that maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. But staying only deepened the fracture. Because every day, Meghan grew colder. Every night, she grew sharper. The warmth that once made him defy the world was gone, replaced by a woman who knew the power she held over him and wielded it without mercy. And here's the contradiction. Meghan told the world she was the victim, that she was silenced, bullied, and broken by the monarchy. But behind closed doors, Harry was the one silenced. He was the one walking on eggshells. He was the one whose voice cracked under her glare. Isn't it ironic? The man who escaped a gilded cage for freedom found himself trapped in another, built not by the monarchy, but by his wife. The tension exploded one night in California. A fight so loud the neighbors allegedly heard it. Harry demanded the truth. Meghan spat back with venom. And in the chaos, Meghan said something that froze him. "You'll never leave me. You need me more than I need you." That line cut Harry deeper than any accusation. Because in that moment, he realized the balance of power in their marriage had shifted completely. He wasn't the rescuer anymore. He wasn't the prince who gave up everything. He was the prisoner. But here's the twist. While Harry wrestled with his doubts, Meghan grew more reckless. She stopped hiding her warmth with the guard. She let her laughter linger. She let her touches seem casual, but too frequent. Almost as if daring Harry to confront her again. And Harry, broken, watched it all. So here's where the storm brews. A marriage consumed by suspicion. A prince haunted by ghosts. A duchess who refused to bow. And at the center, one man whose silence became unbearable, the bodyguard himself. Because the guard was about to do something that would turn Harry's suspicion into undeniable proof. But what was it? What step did the guard take that changed everything? That's where we go next. And the answer would rip apart what little remained of Harry's trust. What happens when the whispers you've been chasing suddenly turn into a confrontation you can't escape? That's where we enter Chapter 7, the night Harry finally snapped, when words he had swallowed for years spilled out in an eruption that Meghan couldn't silence. Because every lie, every denial, every whispered laugh had led to this moment. Harry demanding the truth, and Meghan fighting back with all the fire she could summon. Picture it. The California home. Not the staged, polished mansion we see in glossy magazine spreads, but the real one. Quiet halls, dim lighting, tension so thick you could feel it crackle in the air. Harry pacing, restless, fists clenched, replaying the same images in his mind. Meghan laughing too warmly. The guard's hand on her arm. The way her eyes faltered that one night when she realized Harry had caught them. He couldn't hold it in anymore. The words burst out like shrapnel. Tell me the truth. Are you in love with him? Now pause. Can you feel the weight of that question? It wasn't just suspicion. It wasn't just anger. It was desperation. A man broken, begging for honesty even if it destroyed him. And Meghan? She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She didn't even pause. She fired back like a weapon. Are you serious? After everything I've sacrificed, after everything I've endured for you, this is what you think of me. Do you see the contradiction? Instead of defending her innocence, she flipped the script. She made Harry the villain. She turned his doubt into betrayal. And Harry, already fragile, already torn between love and fury, staggered under the blow. The argument raged. Meghan accused Harry of paranoia, of obsession, of letting his mother's ghost poison their marriage. You're not seeing me, she shouted. You're seeing Diana everywhere you look. You want to destroy us just like they destroyed her. But Harry wouldn't back down. For once, he didn't fold. He shouted back, his voice raw. Don't you dare bring her into this. I know what I saw. I know what you're hiding. And then, the moment that silenced them both, Harry produced what he believed was proof. A message, a photo, a tiny fragment, innocent on its own, damning in context. Maybe it was a text Meghan had tried to delete. Maybe it was a candid shot of her and the guard, closer than they should have been. Whatever it was enough to rip the air from the room. Meghan's eyes froze. For the first time, the performance cracked. And in that crack, Harry saw everything. But Meghan wasn't finished. She gathered herself, sharp as a blade, and launched her counterattack. She told him he was weak, that without her, he was nothing, that the world had mocked him as the spare, and she was the only reason he mattered. You'd still be rotting in your family's shadow if it weren't for me, she spat. And now you want to accuse me? Pathetic. Can you imagine the devastation of hearing that? The man who gave up a crown, who cut ties with his blood, who endured exile for love, being told that love had made him worthless. And here's the emotional spike. Harry broke. He collapsed into silence, unable to argue, unable to defend himself. Because deep down, he feared she was right. That without her, he was just a forgotten prince, stripped of purpose. That he had shackled his identity to the very woman who now tore it apart. But Meghan underestimated something. In her fury, she pushed too far. She didn't just deny the rumor. She admitted nothing, but she revealed everything. Her words, her tone, her lack of fear. It wasn't the reaction of an innocent woman. It was the reaction of someone who believed she had already won. And Harry knew it. He didn't have all the proof. He didn't have the smoking gun. But he had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough to know the truth. And the truth was unbearable. The confrontation ended not with resolution, but with silence. Harry retreating into himself. Meghan storming out of the room, defiant, unbroken. Two people in the same house, living in different worlds. But here's the twist. That night wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because once the confrontation had happened, there was no going back. Harry could no longer pretend. Meghan could no longer perform. The whispers were now shouts. And the marriage was now a war. And in every war, there's a moment when the first real weapon is drawn. Because soon after that night, Harry would stumble upon something that stripped away the last veil of denial. Evidence too sharp, too damning, too undeniable. But what exactly did Harry find? What was the proof that turned suspicion into certainty? That's where we go next. And what he uncovered would ignite a firestorm no one could put out. What if the moment you've dreaded for years doesn't come as a headline or a rumor, but as hard, cold proof in your own hands? That's where we are now. Chapter 8 plunges into the discovery that stripped Harry of his last defense, the evidence he could no longer dismiss, deny, or excuse. Because once you see the truth written out in black and white, or worse, captured in pixels, you can never go back. It didn't happen in a palace. It didn't happen at a press conference. It happened in the quietest, most ordinary of ways. Harry, restless, searching, digging where he shouldn't have, A laptop left open. A phone screen lit at the wrong time. A folder he was never meant to see. That's all it took. One accidental click. One forgotten password. And suddenly, Harry was staring at the kind of truth that unravels lives. The first clue was small. A text exchange. Innocent on the surface. Talk of schedules, reminders, logistics. The sort of messages you'd expect between a duchess and her bodyguard. But then came the tone. The warmth. The words too playful, too personal. A late-night timestamp. Emojis not meant for professionalism. A thank you that carried weight far heavier than gratitude. Harry scrolled. His heart sank. This wasn't one stray message. It was a pattern. Dozens of exchanges, growing bolder with time. A rhythm of intimacy, of inside jokes, of secrets shared beyond duty. And there it was, the proof he'd been both terrified and desperate to find. But here's the contradiction. Proof doesn't always free you. Sometimes it chains you tighter. Because in that moment, Harry didn't feel relief. He didn't feel vindicated. He felt destroyed. Because what do you do when your suspicions become reality? When the betrayal you feared is suddenly undeniable? You can't run back to ignorance. You can't erase what you've seen. You're trapped. And Harry was trapped. Trapped in a marriage he had built his entire identity around. Trapped in love with a woman he could no longer trust. Trapped in the shadow of Diana's ghost, replaying her tragedy step by step. Do you see the cruel irony? Harry had tried to rewrite history, but all he'd done was act out the sequel. Let's inject the emotional spike. Imagine him sitting there, alone in the California mansion, scrolling through message after message. His hands shaking, his chest tight, his mind spinning with every LOL, every winking emoji, every phrase that felt more like a lover than an employee. Would you rage? Would you confront her? Or would you sit there in silence, crushed under the weight of your own heartbreak? Harry chose silence first. Hours passed. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stared, until finally, the silence broke into fury. The confrontation was explosive. Harry cornered Meghan, waving the proof in her face. His words were broken, furious, trembling. Explain this. Explain all of it. Don't you dare lie to me. And Meghan? She didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't crumble. She laughed. Laughed. The coldest laugh Harry had ever heard. This is what you're destroying us over. Texts. Messages taken out of context. She spun the narrative with venom, accusing him of invasion, of paranoia, of weakness. You went through my phone? My laptop? How pathetic. Do you feel the twist? Harry had found proof of her betrayal, and she turned it into proof of his. Proof that he was the paranoid husband. Proof that he was the one breaking trust. That's the brilliance of manipulation. Even caught red-handed, Meghan shifted the blame. But Harry wasn't fooled this time. Not anymore. The laughter, the mockery, the dismissal. It didn't erase the messages burned into his mind. He shouted, raw and broken, "Don't lie to me. I saw enough. I know the truth." And then Meghan snapped. Her eyes dark, her words sharp as knives. You think you're the victim here? You've always been the victim. Your family, your press, your ghosts, always someone else to blame. Maybe I needed someone who wasn't drowning in self-pity. That line cut deeper than anything else. Because for the first time, Harry saw it clearly. He wasn't just betrayed. He was despised. The woman he gave up his crown for, the woman he abandoned his family for, saw him not as a partner, but as a weakness. And yet, here's the contradiction that makes betrayal so cruel. Harry still loved her. Even as she tore him apart, even as the proof burned in his hands, he couldn't let go. Because love isn't logical. It's destructive. And Harry was still shackled to the very woman who had destroyed his life. But silence wasn't possible anymore. Proof changes everything. And now that Harry had seen it, others would too. Because soon, those messages, those whispers, those fragments of truth would begin to leak. Not from Harry, not from Meghan, but from someone who had been watching quietly all along. Because the bodyguard's silence was about to break. And when it did, the entire world would hear the truth Harry had tried so hard to bury. What happens when silence finally breaks? When the man at the center of it all, the shadow figure everyone whispered about, steps into the light. Chapter 9 takes us to that moment, when the bodyguard himself became more than a rumor, more than a shadow, more than Meghan's alleged secret. Because his silence, once the strongest shield, became the loudest admission of all. Picture the scene. The palace walls already rattled. The California mansion already cracked by suspicion. Harry carrying the weight of proof he didn't want, Meghan defiant, unyielding. And then, just when they thought they could bury it, he returned. The bodyguard. The man whose name was never splashed across headlines, whose face rarely appeared in photos, suddenly reemerged. And with his reemergence, the whispers reignited like wildfire. The palace couldn't ignore it. Charles, weary from decades of scandals, was forced to hear the rumor directly from his advisors. The bodyguard is back. And he isn't denying. Imagine the chill that must have sent through Clarence's house. A father who watched his marriage collapse under the weight of infidelity, now hearing his son's marriage was haunted by the same betrayal. A monarch who survived Diana's tragedy, now staring at its twisted sequel. But here's the contradiction. The bodyguard never said yes. He never admitted an affair. He didn't need to. He said nothing. No denial. No press statement. No lawsuit. Just silence. And in the world of royals, silence is as damning as confession. Harry couldn't escape it. Friends called him. Why won't he deny it? The question echoed. Meghan snapped back, furious, accusing Harry of fueling the fire by even entertaining it. But the truth was unavoidable. Silence speaks. And Harry heard it louder than anything. Now let's add the emotional spike. Imagine Harry confronting his father, sitting across from Charles in Clarence's house, voice trembling, fists clenched, eyes red. It's true, isn't it? You believe it too. Charles, stoic, cold, scarred F. Do you feel the weight of that? A father telling his son that what once destroyed Diana might now be destroying Meghan. That the crown is cursed, that the family is doomed to repeat the same sins. And Harry, broken, whispered the words he swore he'd never say. Meghan destroyed my life. Let's pause. Because this wasn't Harry lashing out at the press or at his family. This was Harry admitting for the first time to his father that the woman he gave up everything for had betrayed him. Not in whispers, not in suspicions, but in his heart. And Charles? He didn't comfort him. He didn't embrace him. He didn't even rage. He simply turned away, the way monarchs do when emotions clash with duty. And in that cold silence, Harry realized he had lost more than his wife. He had lost his father too. But here's the twist. The bodyguard's silence didn't last forever. Because silence breeds speculation. And speculation breeds attention. The press hunted him. Old colleagues spoke. Former associates whispered. Stories emerged of private meetings, strange favors, long hours off duty. Nothing proven. Everything suspicious. Enough to stain Meghan's image permanently. And Meghan? She fought back harder than ever. Lawsuits. Denials. Threats. Public performances of loyalty with Harry, staged to perfection. But the harder she fought, the less convincing it became. Because everyone remembered Diana. Everyone remembered Barry Manicky. And everyone whispered, it's happening again. Now think about the irony. Harry fled the palace to escape Diana's ghost. He moved continents to protect Meghan from the fate that killed his mother. And yet here he was, staring into the same mirror, repeating the same tragedy. Only this time, the ghost wasn't haunting him, it was mocking him. And the palace? They waited. They watched. They let the rumor grow. Because for once, Harry's destruction wasn't their doing. It was Meghan's. And in their silence, the monarchy regained its strength. But silence can't hold forever. Because soon, the bodyguard himself would face a choice. Continue hiding or speak. And the moment he chose to speak, even just a few words, would ignite a storm no one could control. Because when the guard finally opened his mouth, he didn't just confirm Harry's worst fears. He revealed something even darker, something that tied Meghan's betrayal not just to Harry, but to the monarchy itself.